Quentin Tarantino is one of the greatest and most recognized filmmakers in recent memory. He has written and directed 9 films to date. While all filmmakers utilize the same visual aspects and features when making their films, Tarantino's unorthodox methods and the success he's had with these methods prove that there are no rules to how these aspects and features can be applied to a film. One feature that Tarantino has a particular way of utilizing is the narrative. Most films utilize the traditional form of the narrative, this being that the film has a beginning and then a sequence of events that are in chronological order that lead to the end. In some of his movies, including Pulp Fiction and Reservoir Dogs, Tarantino uses a non-linear style to form the narrative of the film. In Pulp Fiction, multiple different storylines and the non-linear structure of the narrative are required for both Tarantino to tell the story the way he intended and for the audience to fully understand it. This storyline involves the 2 protagonists of the movie, Jules and Vincent, 2 hitmen who experience a freak incident early in the movie. The first scene in the movie briefly depicts a restaurant robbery that's about to take place. Then the 2 men have their freak incident while on a job. An armed man bursts out of the bathroom and has a clear shot at the 2 men. Miraculously, none of the bullets hit the men and they escape safely. Jules sees it as a sign that he needs to live a more practical and moral lifestyle, but Vincent sees it as simply a couple more dodge bullets. The final scene of the movie returns to this restaurant robbery as it's taking place and reveals Jules and Vincent as customers in the restaurant. The men are faced with the choice of killing the robbers or letting them leave peacefully. Vincent wants to kill them, but because of Jules' recent epiphany about how he wants to change, the robbers are allowed to leave. The freak incident changed Jules for the better and didn't affect Vincent at all. Tarantino's non-linear style of making the narrative makes it possible for the audience to understand the central meaning of the film. It was required to show the robbery scene last because all of the other scenes were essential in understanding the meaning behind Jules' sudden display of humility and compassion in the restaurant and how it contrasts to Vincent's continuing lack of these qualities. The freak incident steered Jules on the right path and he retired from being a hitman. Vincent, on the other hand, didn't take the incident as a learning lesson and quickly met his demise because of it. Another aspect that Tarantino uses in many of his films is camera angles. He uses certain camera angles to establish the roles and personalities of certain characters. His films have become famous for the low-angle camera view that is routinely seen in his work. This camera view that Tarantino uses has become known in the film world as the trunk shot. The camera is placed in the trunk of the car, and the characters who open the trunk are looking down on it. This camera angle works well in establishing that the characters looking down into the lens of the camera are people of power and people who should be feared. This camera angle is most effective when the camera is shooting from the point of view of another character that's being held captive in the trunk. The film Reservoir Dogs utilizes the trunk shot in this way. The trunk opens and the screen shows 3 robbers in black suits looking down into the camera that's in the trunk. This shot is from the point of view of the police officer that the men are holding captive in the trunk. This shot is used to capture the power and the savage nature of the robbers. Speaking of those robbers in their black suits, Tarantino is always great at being able to create the lovable criminal in all of his movies. I usually tend to find myself becoming attached to certain characters in the movie even though they are dangerous criminals, whether it's the intimidating Vic Vega of Reservoir Dogs or Jules of Pulp Fiction. Tarantino has a way of making the characters so charismatic that the audience has no choice but to like them. One way that Tarantino displays the charisma of his characters to the audience is with costumes. One of the most well-known costumes that is seen in his films is the black suit that is seen worn in Pulp Fiction and Reservoir Dogs. The characters in these films already have reputations as dangerous criminals, but the sleek black suits give them another level of the intimidation factor. Another way Tarantino forces the audience to become attached to these characters is by allowing the audience to really get to know them. One way he does this is by writing dialogue for the characters that isn't related to the plot in any way. It's just 2 or more of the characters having a normal, everyday conversation. Like at the beginning of Reservoir Dogs, when they have a long conversation about the meaning of Madonna songs, and then they move to the topic of whether or not it's required to tip a waitress. It's at least a good 5 minutes of the movie that has absolutely nothing to do with the plot, but the normal and candid conversation allows the audience to look at the men as real people as opposed to just the movie characters that they really are. While Tarantino has been criticized for some of the methods that I have mentioned as they are unorthodox, his sheer success over his career more than proves their value.